Rude texts and neighbour disputes are among the so-called trivial reports to police, which will no longer be recorded as offences in a new crime shake-up by the Home Office.
The move aims to free up police time so that officers can focus on catching criminals. Policing Minister Chris Philp joins us now from Westminster. A very good morning to you. So how much time, in your view, is being wasted on unnecessary, well, I suppose, things that are reported as crimes from the person who's offended, but you don't think that it deserves to be recorded as such?
Good morning. Well, the National Police Chiefs Council have estimated that the changes we're announcing today will save 443,000 hours of police time each year, nearly 500,000 police hours a year, which can instead be spent looking after victims, keeping the public safe, and, of course, catching and prosecuting criminals. So I think the public, expect the police to be spending their time on those active public safety duties rather than filling in paperwork, which doesn't ultimately help catch criminals or keep the public safe. And that's why I think these changes are actually quite important, because nearly 500,000 hours of police time a year is a lot of time. That can really, I think, help keep the public safe.
Mr. Philp, it is a lot of time, but of course, for the people that have reported that offence, they will feel like a crime has been committed. They will feel like that time isn't being wasted because a dispute is being settled by somebody who can help.
Well, to be clear, there's two or three changes being made. One is to make sure that to remove the requirement to recreate multiple records for the same report. At the moment, for some offences, the separate records get created in relation to one report. So clearly we can continue recording everything the victim tells us, but only record it in one record rather than in multiple records. So that's part of the change. One of the other changes is making sure that where people report the so-called malicious communications offences, where the someone's been caused offence, those will get recorded where the criminal threshold is met, but not where the criminal threshold is not met. So we're making sure that we are not needlessly recording some of those incidents. Of course, for intelligence purposes, the officers can make a note on the Police National Database to make sure that it's recorded if it's needed in the future. But we don't think it's necessary to create a full crime record where the criminal threshold, in the officer's opinion, hasn't been met. There are also some examples of things like disturbances, outside a pub and that kind of thing, where there's no victim and where the matter is settled down when the police arrive, which we also don't think need to be recorded in the same way.
It's also quite handy from a government's perspective, isn't it, to reclassify and downgrade reports, because it would help make it look as though crime is falling, when in fact perhaps people's experience won't be changing radically, but your numbers will show something different to the reality.
No, it won't, because the only data set in terms of crime prevalence generally is the Crime Survey of England and Wales. That's the only ONS endorsed crime data set, and we're not making any changes at all to the way that the Crime Survey figures are compiled. The Crime Survey figures show that since 2010, since this government's been in office, overall crime, excluding fraud and computer misuse, which only came into the figures more recently, crime has fallen by 50%, violence by 39%, domestic burglaries fallen by 56%, and I think car theft by 39% since 2010. It's great that those things have all reduced. There has been a sharp increase in
sexual and violent crime, though, hasn't there?
Well, violent crime in general has declined by 39% since 2010, but we do want to do more to prosecute rape in particular, where the prosecution figures, as you've reported in the past, have been, frankly, too low in recent years. So we've developed a new way of investigating and prosecuting rape called Operation Soteria. In the first force where that was piloted, which was Avon and Somerset, we saw the number of charges of rape going up by 2 or 3 times. So we're going to roll that out across the whole country. That'll be completed by June of this year, and we expect that to lead to a significant increase in the number of charges and prosecutions for rape.
Which would be very welcome. The Prime Minister in 2019 pledged that the government would increase the number of new police by 20,000. It's the end of March to which you had the challenge to try and make that happen. I know that you've said previously that you're not going to discuss whether you've reached that target for another few weeks. However, what we do know is at the end of December, the Met Police had failed to reach their target of 4,557 police officers. They were about 1,300 police officers short. So they had a couple more months to try and achieve that goal. Are you confident that they will have got there? Are you confident that you actually have satisfied that challenge from that 2019 manifesto? Because more police officers is going to allow you and our police force to solve more crime.
Yeah, that's right. So the official figures are going to come out on the 26th of April in 13 days' time. But my expectation is that across England and Wales as a whole, we will have met our target. I'm relatively confident that we'll have done that. And that will mean we have more police officers in England and Wales than we have ever had at any time in history, which, as you say, is really important because it means they can spend time protecting the public, looking after victims and prosecuting criminals. But it's important that, you know, the extra officers are fantastic. We've got to make sure their time isn't taken up by unnecessary bureaucracy, which is what today's changes are about.
And can I ask you about Suella Braverman's comments about British Pakistani men, about them particularly having an issue with English white girls? And she made those comments without any kind of context around the Home Office's own data, which suggests and shows that those kind of sexual abuse crimes are in the majority committed by white men. Adil Ray, who's a fellow presenter here, as you know, has said that he has suffered since those comments that Suella Braverman made, labelling British Pakistani men, as he says, with no caveats, no kindness, no compassion, simply labelling British Pakistani men as having an issue with white girls. He says he's suffered nothing but racism for the last 7 days. I wonder whether these sorts of comments and the kind of problems that her comments have given to other British Pakistani men in the last 7 days would be deemed by police officers as unnecessary to be recorded.
Well, so first of all, I think the first point to make is that I think the Home Secretary, when she commented a few days or a few weeks ago, was clear that the vast majority of those communities are law-abiding, upstanding members of our community. I think what she was referring to is the fact that historically there were cases in places like particularly some towns in the north, like Rotherham, Rochdale. I think there's some cases in Telford as well.
Do you think it's responsible to not... You're a policing minister. Do you think that's helpful to not give the full context of the full data when making these comments? Because otherwise it just looks like you're playing politics and trying to cause division. And you're causing problems for people who are law-abiding citizens.
Well, I think she did provide the whole context, and you've repeated it just now, which is helpful. But there were these cases in the past where, frankly, the system turned essentially a blind eye to very, very serious offending. I've mentioned 3 of the towns involved. There were others as well. And victims, who were generally speaking girls, were not being looked after, were not being safeguarded.
Do you think that
crimes weren't being investigated?
In your new shake-up of the way crimes are going to be recorded, if some of those comments were racist and online towards anybody, would those now be at the discretion of a police officer to decide whether that should be recorded or not?
Well, in relation to any comment that's made, there's legal definitions of what constitutes a criminal offence. There are things like malicious communications. It's set out clearly in law what that means, and police officers obviously will use their judgment as they look at each case individually, and they do that independently of government, right? Because the police are operationally independent, they make those judgments, and then when it comes to prosecutions, the Crown Prosecution Service make their independent decisions about prosecutions, and the courts then try cases independently of government. That's what it means to have an independent judiciary and an operationally independent police force. We're committed to making sure that girls are properly protected. There were serious failings in the past. A blind eye was turned to quite large-scale offending, and that was completely wrong. And I think the Home Secretary is entitled to make observations about that. It's also partly due to not understanding what grooming was, actually. There was a great deal of misunderstanding of the crime itself. But I'm afraid we've run out of time. We shall have to leave it there. It's 7:42. Thank you so much, Chris Philp, for joining us on the programme.